Welcome to this episode of Friday Special. I'm Waqas Majid Khan. Today we're talking about China and US tariff issues that are going on. There's a huge rift between them. What impact is that going to have on international politics and on the economy? That is our topic for discussion today. How is it going to affect CPEC? Because also CPEC was mentioned in certain comments made by Mr. Mike Pompeo. So we'll be talking about that. Let me introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me for the conversation today, first of all, we have AVM IKRAM BHATTI Sahab with us. Joining him, we have Dr. SHERYAAR Khan, and with him we have Dr. NOOR FATIMA, who's a political economist. Thank you very much for being here. Sir, I'll start with you. First of all, there was a very strong Chinese response to the latest move in raising tariffs. Almost now we're looking at maybe $200 billion worth of Chinese goods are going to be taxed up to 25%. How is this going to play on? So the Chinese have made their displeasure felt quite well, but the Americans don't seem to be backing down. Where is it all headed?
Well, you see, and I believe that there are two aspects to this development. Firstly, of course, the Americans would want to continue to maintain their global hegemon status for as long as they can. And for that, they have to arrest the rise of China. And this is one of the attempts by Mr. Donald Trump to do that. Secondly, I think being a businessman, he would like to rectify the trade imbalance that he has with most of the countries in the world, leading China, Japan, EU, Canada, even Mexico. And that is why he has raised tariffs, and now he's facing reciprocal rise from the other side, and that is what is leading to the conflict. And now when you say that it's $250 billion worth of trade goods which are going to be tariffed up to 25%, but in the news we can find that it might even go up to 550 billion, not just
in fact the entire Chinese exports to the US.
So that is in fact going to affect global economy.
And in a negative way.
In a negative way. And we hope that the Americans can have a greater realization or a better realization of the consequences of such a move and a counter move, and that they hold on to it and do not go any further, because the fact remains that it is not only these tariffs. The Americans have also started to penalize some Chinese companies, Huawei or even another company which has been importing these computer chips for sale to even North Korea or Iran.
Right, sir.
And they have been saying that the Chinese have been stealing technology or forcing the American companies to share classified or restricted technology with them, and of course selling this technology further on to the countries which the Americans have embargoed, like Iran and North Korea. And how much is the truth in this? That of course only the time would tell, but the fact remains that the Americans want to implement these restrictions on American companies, on these Chinese companies, which are in fact playing a major role in the rise of China, especially in their economy and in the global trade.
Right.
So, these are, I think, the objectives of Mr. Donald Trump, being a businessman and a leader of, so far, the sole superpower.
Well, what we're seeing, Dr. SHERYAAR, is that despite all the pressure that the Americans are putting on the Chinese are not backing down either. They've also reciprocated those tariffs. In many cases, they've put retaliatory tariffs on US goods, and they've also made it known that they feel that the Americans are trying to blackmail them. And how is that going to be, that perception going to be dealt with by the Chinese and the rest of the world that is looking at this trade war happening?
Well, Waqas, if you look at the trade wars and look at both of the countries, the way they're tackling it is different. For United States, it is the big concern for Donald Trump is their trade deficit with other countries, and especially China, which is in favor of China. Now, there are other ways of reducing the trade deficits, and some people have recommended it to the Trump administration. For instance, devaluing the dollar, which they're not doing. So if they could devalue the dollar so they can, increase their export, but they're not doing it. They are rather taking on China and other countries. Now in China, this would have serious repercussions. It's not like, it's a temporary thing. It can affect, if both are involved in trade war, China would be affected a lot because some 200 billion export China can lose to the United States. And that means a lot of Chinese companies going out of business. And some estimates are suggesting 4 million Chinese working would be laid off. And this will also then affect the supply chain because, for instance, the electronic goods and others, they all come from Singapore and other countries, and the raw material comes from countries, even from countries like Pakistan. So they will also be affected. In the United States, then, something like 35 billion or 40 billion export would be affected, but it will translate something like 200 jobs. They would be laid off. Now, when that happens, in China, they can sell it as, they can ask their people to be, patriotic and, you give sacrifice because China is a different society. It's an authoritarian society or a party-based government is there. In the United States, it would be really hard, even, if there are 100,000 jobs are lost. So it would be really hard. There would be strong political backlash. Now, what can happen actually when this all, transpires? Supply chains, could be transferred to other countries. United States, big companies in the United States, they would still want, their supply chains to be intact. And for that to happen, they may go to safer countries like, let's say, Vietnam and Latin American countries. So they would move there. Even Chinese manufacturers can move to other countries as well, which China would not want. So China is worried about this. They are depreciating their yen, and if yuan is depreciated, it can, for temporarily it can absorb the shock, but in the long run it cannot. So China would try to diversify. It will try to find out more avenues for trade than our exports, or they may, change their production and try to acquire high tech from somewhere else. So it's a serious time for China as well. At the time when the president is so aggressive economically to expand Chinese influence as well. Now, what it doesn't bode well for countries like Pakistan as well. Since we are engaged in a CPEC project with them, we have trade with China, and if Chinese trade is affected, so it can also affect us. It is interlinked now. We are in a web of kind of a complex relationship with China, and any meltdown or any economic crisis, if it happens in China, so it can also have its repercussions on Pakistan's economy as well. I think this is, it would also send ripples in global economy, even the European Union and other countries as well, and they are also worried about it. At the moment, it seems that both are engaging also in rhetoric, and they're also proceeding with countermeasures. And in this trade war, China would be at the receiving end because it is the exporter. It's the balance of trade is in the favor of China.
But it's also going to affect the Americans as well. Dr. Fatima, we also understand that the Americans owe a lot of money to the Chinese, almost over $1 trillion. What if the Chinese came knocking on the doors of the American economy and said, please pay us back our money? Where would that lead the American economy, and what would be the repercussions of such a move?
Yes, if we look at the American economy, that is $19.4 trillion at this moment, and China has $12 trillion. And most recently, 40 companies of US have written to Trump administration that they should not escalate this tariff because that would hurt their products also, and particularly this Microsoft, Apple, and IBM. These companies, because they said that then we will be in difficulty to have products of having access on information also, and then the product will be expensive, then there will be lesser consumption, and then the people will be losing their jobs. So, and there's also other companies who are writing them for not having more tariff imposition on technical sector of the China also, because that will also impact on the day-to-day goods also. So it will affect, according to the certain anticipation of this tug of war between the two, is that the US will be losing around 2.5% of their GDP if this war escalates between them. And then the rest of the world, of course, will be affected around 5%. So that is actually really a situation of very concern of the Chinese companies and of course, the people who are working in Chinese companies, and there are certain American companies who have contracted out to the Chinese company also. So there is a tension going on, and there is, of course, pressure building on the Trump administration to revisit this escalation of this imposition of this tariff. And of course, the diplomatic community between the two countries also, they are trying to bring the things on the table so that they can work together and bring another kind of there can be a reform on the structures also if there is some concern of Trump administration, and they want to have to compete Chinese product, as well as they want to secure their economic growth also. So economic security Trump administration wants at this time. So they need to find a middle way which can be suited to the both.
Because one of the main things that Donald Trump spoke about was bringing jobs back to America, and do you think that this particular policy is enabling Donald Trump to achieve that policy?
Apparently, I don't think so,
It's going to be detrimental.
because it will be affecting overall their macroeconomic indicators. So I don't think so that he is able to generate that much jobs, which he has committed during this election campaign also.
And we also have the agricultural sector in the U.S., which is taking a big hit as a result of these economic policies.
And they are one of them also who have approached the Trump administration to revisit this escalation of the tariff also.
Well, they're very interesting times that we are living in, sir, and as the Chinese saying goes, may you not live in interesting times, but it's too late for that. One of the things that came out from the Chinese side was, sir, that they said that they would like to advise the United States to correct its attitude and not try to engage in blackmail. This will not work on China. And secondly, they would advise the US to return to reason and not blindly let emotions affect their decisions, because in the end, they will harm themselves. Again, what the Chinese are the message that the Chinese are giving to the Americans. Do you think that message is going to be taken well by the Americans, sir?
Well, I think it's a very realistic advice, because the fact remains that over the years, manufacturing has moved out from USA. A lot of jobs have been outsourced. The cost of doing business in America is much higher than what it is in China. So if the Americans impose those additional tariffs, of course, the Chinese goods are going to be much more expensive in the US, and there is no alternate to them. They cannot find as cheap goods or as, the quality goods they are importing from China, from anywhere else in the world, certainly not from Europe, certainly not from South America, because firstly, those goods are not produced over there. Secondly, even if they were, the quality will not be as good. Hence, the Americans, I think, will sooner or later, in my view, would have to revisit this policy, because it is going to aggravate the situation instead of, bringing back jobs to America. They might lose more jobs instead of bringing more jobs back. So I think it's a very pragmatic advice from the Chinese, and we can just hope that the Americans can gather enough wisdom to pay heed to this advice and keep the world, at least that region, peaceful, at least between the two countries, China and the USA. Else we have a lot of turmoil elsewhere in the world.
That's right, sir. And although there have been no formal talks between Washington and Beijing, Mr. Donald Trump's demands that China make fundamental changes to its policies on intellectual property protections, technology transfers, and subsidies for high-tech industries. Do you think that the Chinese might be willing to make those changes in their policies to appease the Americans, or do you think that we are headed towards an escalation of this trade war?
Well, if you look at the Chinese economy, of course, there are always objections on Chinese stealing the property rights, intellectual property rights, and not honoring them, and producing, copies and replicas. and that's why they don't put in R&D the way other companies have done it, and that's why R&D is added into the cost of all the stuff. China doesn't have to do that, and that's why one of the reason is they have cheaper products. I think some of the international standards China will meet at the end, and I believe China is ready to meet some of the realistic demands of international community or United States for that matter, and that would be the only way where Chinese products could be a bit expensive, and US products would be competitive in that sense. United States has another option as well. If it decides to depreciate its dollar, it will affect the world economy a lot, but it can be used as a tool or a blackmailing tool by the United States against other countries, for instance, European Union, because if it's devalued, so it will also offset euro there, and European countries would not want that to happen. Even China would not want that to happen. So since it's a very big economy, $19 trillion economy, United States has these leverages. But you are right in a sense that will it bring back the jobs, which was the initial promise that will bring back the businesses and will increase tariffs, so the cost would be high outside, so they will come back. There are some indications, yes, some of the businesses are coming back, but they may not come back entirely, and because of the trade war, they will lose some more jobs. So at the end, we may not see a big difference, but we have to be patient and see whether Donald Trump policy can really deliver. Leading economists, they don't believe in it.
Because what we're seeing, Sheryaaar Saab, is about the tit-for-tat responses that are coming for every tariff that the US is putting on any particular goods that are being imported from any particular country, whether it's the European Union or whether it's China. They are also reciprocating in the same way. We have a tit-for-tat going on. So if the Americans are raising tariffs, so are the Chinese. So American products will be expensive in other countries.
Yes.
Why would people buy them? So then eventually the business is going to take a huge hit. So where is the sense in pursuing such a policy, which is for all practical purposes and for everyone to see quite...
You are right in that sense, but if you look at from the United States perspective, I may not agree with them, but look at their perspective. They have an increasing trade deficit with every country. It means dollars are flying out of the country, more not coming. So ultimately, it's suffering. United States economy is suffering. So it has to do something. There are prudent ways. They can consult the economists. There are prudent ways to improve that situation. This is what the United States in the start wanted, this new liberal economics.
Absolutely.
This is what it wanted.
The entire new world order was started by the Americans.
Yeah, it was exactly the same policy. But they now believe, Trump believes that we were suffering because of that. Most of their businesses have really gone out of United States, and people have remained jobless, and those jobless people have voted Donald Trump. Nobody believed that Trump would win, but they didn't realize that there are so many people who have lost their jobs, especially in the mid of the country, and they would vote Donald Trump. That populist stronger did he raise, so they voted him, and maybe he's thinking of the midterm election now coming, so he will continue with those rhetorics. He will not back down before the elections, and he may want to re-elect himself, so he has to deliver on the promises. There are other ways. For instance, leading economists have suggested that so many other adjustments could be made, structural adjustment in the United States economy, so they can reduce the trade gap. On the other hand, United States in itself is a very big economy, 19 trillion economy. And if the balance trade with China is in the favor of China, so it would be China would be hit most. United States economy was always with this philosophy that it suffices to itself. If it can cater to the needs of its own people, so it doesn't need, to
So the
outgrow
size
the
of
world.
the American
It's
domestic
very
market
big.
is
It's
so
very
huge.
big, yeah. So they don't need to import from other countries. They may not export a lot of goods, but they don't need to import, so they can reduce the import bill. So they have to cater, they have to produce for their own people, and that would suffice for the United States. So they can reduce the import bill. So there is a rationale and logic in that. And in this trade war, it's China which is losing most. That's why China is advising them. China is not a well-wisher of the United States. Of course, it's its own well-wisher. It has to keep its economic interests first, and that's why it's advising the United States against those policies.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a bit about Pakistan's economic outlook, and especially when we talk about the CPEC project. We had some comments coming from Mr. Mike Pompeo saying that if Pakistan approaches the IMF, they'll be looking at it very closely, and they will probably not want the IMF to bail out Pakistan. What's your outlook on the economy right now, ma'am? Do you think that the economy right now is in a very precarious crisis sort of situation, or do you think that it's not that bad?
No, it's bad. The Pakistan economy is not in good shape at this moment, and that's why we need equity, and that's why we had this recent policy of that the people should bring their money back to Pakistan. And now the rupee is appreciating only because now the people, they don't want to buy, and the flight of capital is somehow is stopped. The point is that, including me, we were projecting that this government will go to IMF, and they should not go to IMF, including our observation and reservation is about CPEC also. Because when you will go to them, CPEC will be the one of the agenda on which they are dictating their terms. And in that way, it might get late, and you might not be able to pursue whole CPEC plan as we have planned already or signed with China. This is one aspect. The another aspect is China also. If there is a slower growth in China, and China is going to revisit their investment outside the country, for instance, Pakistan with $63 billion, then again, it will take this whole project, it will go slow. So it will affect in either way to Pakistan. But China's, we cannot control if they are going to revisit, but we can control our knocking the door to the IMF this time. Because that is not out of question that they will in fact have certain dictation on your CPEC project. And going time and again, after every 5 to 7 years to IMF is actually no solution of the problem. And we go to IMF, we take this conditional. Why can't we implement or exercise in spirit what IMF want us to do without taking money back to this country? That can be a solution, because we know what kind of a recipe they are going to Pakistan to adopt. So we can do that without having that money, without having that loan in Pakistan, because in that the case we can avoid their dictation.
Right. Let's also talk about the broader implications of this entire project. So, the way the Americans are looking at OBOR, which is the One Belt, One Road project, and CPEC is a small part of that, although a very important one. This entire trade war also seems to be an attempt by the Americans to thwart the Chinese OBOR project. Do you think that these measures are going to be effective enough in thwarting the bigger plan that the Chinese have, which is One Belt, One Road, which is much more than just CPEC?
You see, China has launched this very grand program or project by the name of OBOR, not just for Pakistan, but it is almost for the entire world, especially Europe, Asia, and Africa.
Absolutely, sir.
And this eventually would give a very sharp increase in China's ability to influence events in this region, and of course have an influence on all the countries, which is a very serious challenge to the American global sole superpower status.
But the policy that the Americans are pursuing at the moment seems very isolationist. They seem to not want to deal with the rest of the world anymore. If you just look at the recent decisions that they are making, it seems that they want to destroy the existing trade structure of the world. And because they feel that their domestic market is big enough for them to sustain themselves, they don't want to deal with anybody else.
You see, as long as the Americans are present in Afghanistan, as long as they are present in East Asia, as long as they're present in Europe, they are present in Middle East. What are they doing over there?
Well, that's the million-dollar question,
See,
sir.
what are they doing over there?
Maybe extracting oil mainly.
So I think it will be very difficult for any American president to abandon their global position and just go back to.
But it seems that the
American
policies Donald Trump is pursuing, they seem to be leading towards that sort of eventuality.
But while he may be saying that, but he is not doing that actually. I mean, he should have withdrawn from Afghanistan. He should have withdrawn from Syria. I mean, he should have. It's a long time now that he's still hanging on in Korea or Japan or Philippines, and even in Germany. And they're spending money there. They're not making dollars over there. So if he wants to save money and improve the American life, he should have done all that. But he is not doing that. In fact, he is increasing his presence. We hear that they're going to increase at least 3,000 more troops in Afghanistan.
Well, sir, we still don't know that because there are some positive overtures coming from that side as well, that maybe they've asked the Afghans to give them a permanent base, and that's their only demand.
Yes.
That's the only demand they made
the
to the
Afghans should have
Taliban.
said, you should have told us 19 years ago. Why did you wait that long?
Yes, that's
we could have settled it much earlier.
Absolutely, sir. Now, if you look at this Chinese-American dispute, the Chinese are saying that this current unilateral threats and pressure from the United States will only backfire. Dr. Sheryaaar, why do you think the Chinese are saying that it will backfire for the United States?
Well, for the same reason, if you look at the domestic politics of the United States, it's different from the Chinese. There would be political backlash within the United States when people lose jobs, and their media is very open. They're already very hard on Donald Trump. So there would be a media trial. There is still a media trial. If you look at the press in the United States, most of the press is against this trade war in the United States. So, of course, the United States or Trump would not be able to sustain that pressure. But coming back to your question about this whole abort thing, I think United States now believes that the surplus money that China has, it is going to invest. And it fears that it's putting all these countries in debt trap, the way they're doing the business in other countries. And when the countries are in a debt trap, they may develop, kind of antagonism towards China. Exactly the same superpower syndrome which United States and other superpowers, they suffered. That when you're a superpower and a lot of countries depend on you and you dictate to them, so they start hating you. Now, for China, absorbing that hatred and that antagonism would not be easy, because China is a different society. It's not a democracy. Its own sustainability of growth is questionable. When people get rich there, when there is so much money comes to China, it is believed that people would want more freedoms there, and it will create a domestic kind of situation or anarchy within China. And when there is political instability within China, it won't be able to sustain the businesses that it's doing. Also, the Chinese models may not last for long. An economy is changing fast. It's based on innovation and technology, which is still led by the United States and other European countries. So it's all the economies is driven by the new technologies. So they believe that China won't be able to catch up, and ultimately China would, suffer from inside. It will implode from inside, and all these countries which are now dealing with China, they would be in a debt trap. And in some cases, we have even seen the debt trap of China and the way they're doing business. In one way, we are also in that at the moment, because our import bill has increased because of we are importing so much, for the projects in the CPEC, and that's why there is a deficit. How we are going to come out of this, I think we have to see, how CPEC, is giving then, results, and we can probably then maybe balance that out. So I think this whole region has, on the one side, is a bit of hope of the Chinese investment, the growing economy, so we can, jump onto the bandwagon. But on the other hand, are we, as a, individual countries, are we looking after our own interests the way we are dealing with Chinese?
The Chinese have responded to this particular concern, and the Chinese have said that, first of all, it is a so-called debt trap, and even if it is, then it is not one that has been initiated by China.
So that would
there's an explanation for you.
that's something reassuring at the moment, especially for countries like Pakistan, where we have all these debt problems and repayments and deficits. So we need kind of a relaxation from all these lenders at the moment. Pakistan's economy is already in shambles. So,
but Dr. Noor Fatima has said that we can make those structural changes or reforms within our economy without actually going to the IMF. I'd like to hear more about that from Dr. Noor Fatima. Ma'am, if you could explain or elaborate further on what should be the new government's really concern when dealing with the economy.
First of all, new government wants you to have foreign exchange reserves in your bank so that you can, the rupee should be appreciated and the dollar should stop there. And the point is that you want, the point is how are you going to increase that foreign exchange. The one reason is, the one option is that you can go to 10 billion or 12 billion from IMF, and then you have to follow all those conditionalities, and then you have to return that money also. The second is that, as we are hearing now from the future coming government, that they are trying to motivate people to bring back their money into Pakistan and have more investment in Pakistan. And once the rupee comes out of this pressure, there is a stability, there is a less insecurity, there is a more investment in Pakistan, there is more confidence of the investors in Pakistan, and one indicator is at the stock market also. So then you can have certain other multilateral loans. Now we can negotiate with China more. They have given already $1 billion, but we can have more. My point is that going to IMF time and again, that can be a issue of the last resort, but that is not a solution for the long term. IMF is going to ask you to have your GDP growth, to lessen your inflation rate, and then you lessen your social economic, particular social development programs, and then you have to sometimes freeze your jobs and all these kind of things, which a political government cannot afford at this time. And particularly, inflationary pressure is not the mandate of IMF. IMF is mainly concerned with your balance of payment. Once the balance of payment is there, then IMF out of it. And when IMF is out of it, then you are under pressure of all kind of acceptance and execution of those conditionalities. So why should we have those conditionality after taking that money?
Right.
Why cannot we follow all those principles of bringing back our economy into the
well, that's a lot
path?
easier said than done, ma'am. What are the practical steps that they will have to take? Because again, we are wishing and hoping that the people who have stashed money abroad may bring it back. That's again based on a hope rather than any practical considerations. So what advice would you like to give to the upcoming government regarding how to deal with the economic crisis which is looming?
I think first of all we need to reduce our import bill, if we can do that. Trade deficit, major trade deficit because of the import bill. And secondly, that is the point that we cannot do it in overnight. The energy sector, which is consuming a lot of your import bill, is on fuel. We could have shifted fast on the solars. We could have solarized our roads, our houses. So by this time, we couldn't do that. But if we start today, we will be able to do something.
There's still a chance to revive
we
that.
could do that, yes. And then, of course, this uncertainty actually, that is the basic thing that people do not bring their money into this country. And political instability, economic instability, and then property rights. If you enforce these property rights, then people know that their money is safe. So, of course, but still, there could be many ways that you should avoid this going to IMF again.
All right, let's get AVM Saab's opinion on this, sir. What kind of hopes do you have for the incoming government? Do you think they'll be able to deal with all these economic crises and political issues that are storming on the global stage, sir? Or do you think we're going to have to be very careful and be ready for some austere times or tightening our belts, as they say?
Well, you see, at the face of it, they appear to be very sincere and very honest in what they're saying. They appear to be very sincere and honest in what they're saying. If they're able to implement all that saying, I think we've got it made. but there is a big if over there. So we can just hope and pray that they are able to do what they have promised, because hope has actually what has brought them here. So they have to live up to this hope, else while people may have brought them in, they can also take them out.
Right, sir. Dr. Sheryaaar, moving along and talking about the Chinese and American tariff issue that's going on, we've also talked about how it might affect Pakistan. But when we specifically talk about CPEC, what kind of an impact do you think the American trade war with the Chinese will have on CPEC? Because why is that going to be influenced?
I don't think so. CPEC would be hit that hard because CPEC is a different kind of a project where Chinese companies are coming inside Pakistan and doing the job. So it won't be hit that hard. Yes, one thing can happen, that maybe the Chinese imports that we are doing right now from China for these CPEC projects, if they are hit within the China, then we may see its impact. Otherwise, it will not impact us that much here. But BOR as a whole, or this BRI project as a whole, may be hit because China has this kind of surplus money which it is investing, and if it engages in trade war with United States and its economy suffers, probably then it will face some difficulties in implementing that project as a whole. And there would be other hurdles and political hurdles as well to that BRI. United States and other countries are watching it, and they would not want the entire region. It's now involved some 100 countries. They would not
because
want
they've
all
applied the same kind of tit-for-tat tariff war with the Canadians as well, and not to mention the European Union.
Yeah, and they did that. They raised the tariffs on the aluminum and steel products from European Union and Canada.
Isn't that
and
going to affect the American automobile market as well?
It badly hit, by the way, Canada, and they protested a lot, but Donald Trump didn't listen. And some of those companies, American companies who were working in Canada, they shifted back to United States after they were hit with these tariffs. So in that sense, for America, he was successful. But Canada is heading them back with their own tariffs. As a whole, it's Canada which is losing. In a lot of these instances, United States deficits were not in favor of United States. It was always the other countries, who had the balance tipped in their favor. And that's why Trump been saying, time and again that they would be laughing at us, and they would be saying that they have fooled Americans. But this was exactly the same Americans' policy, of this open trade policy, which has led America to that. I think this is the problem with the capitalism as a whole. It's not with one policy or another policy. Capitalism has this inherent problem of crisis and strains after a couple of decades later, and the crisis then affects the economies. And because of the crisis, then we also see political upheavals. For instance, the 1930s or 29 political economic crisis, it had hit Europe as well, and Germany. Okay, Germany was also hit by the World War I, but it gave rise to populism of Nazism or ultra-nationalism.
And we are seeing that also.
And in this crisis, you see populist leaders rising everywhere because of the economic crisis. People are frustrated, so populist snowbirds, they cheered, and they come to the power. It happened in the United States as well. Trump is a populist leader. So it can also have these political repercussions. So we are living in those times. We are seeing the after effects of the economic crisis. And it's all because of that capitalist system, unfair distribution of wealth.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, sir, for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. It is a topic that will probably be in the news for quite some time. So I guess we'll be talking about it again at some point. Well, you heard the conversation, and as always, we like to say that please draw your own conclusions from what you've heard. And we hope and pray that the trade war does not escalate to a level where it turns into a real war, God forbid. On that hope and on that note, it's goodbye.
worked like a missionary people. But the question is that overall the environment is very much different. It's very much different. It does not respond to those emergencies which we are facing right now. We will have to, in this respect, I would say the PTI government have a special task to perform.
A special task and a very difficult task also.
And they will have to bring about the restructuring of the bureaucracy in this respect, in which a fair deal is given to civil servant, of course, on merit, and transparency, honesty is, it is compensated, it is rewarded with a very clear signals, so that the trust of other government servants should increase in the system as well. That is one reason. Most of the government servants, this is what we have seen, that over the last many decades, as the national morality has declined as a result of it, it has got a negative impact on the bureaucracy morale as well. And large majority of them, they believe that the honest or dishonest civil servants, they are treated likewise in the same way. Rather, sometimes the dishonest servants are rewarded out of turn.
That's not
So
sometimes, most of the time, sir.
So this-
Bande Saab, over to you, sir.
Sir, I was just adding into it that you were talking about the qualification of the bureaucrats. I believe they are well educated. They are going abroad for university degrees. I mean to say, you cannot talk about that there is any lack of knowledge among our bureaucrats. Okay, that's not an issue at all, that lack of. It's basically the structure which is giving them a rent to keep the status quo like that. I give you a real life example. We have an urban unit in Punjab. Okay, I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Nadeemul Haq, our ex-deputy chairman of Planning Commission. He does a broadcast of this Soj Vichar. So there was one lady, Sarah Ahmed, who has done, masters in urban design from LSE. But she was hired by the urban unit. She worked there for 2 years, and after 2 years, she left with frustration. Okay, and what she was telling, that whatever ideas we bring there, we want to implement it, discuss with that. All the bureaucracy which are sitting over there, they just shoot them down. They never allow you to put any idea into practice.
Any fresh idea from a youngster is not accepted to them, sir.
And what they...
Their ego hurts. That's the problem.
They hire us because we got the qualification. They've got the seat. They make us sit over there.
And that's it.
And do the empty work. I mean to say the...
Clerical
the
work, basically.
The files and the reports, which is no one is going to implement. Like this, I mean to say, he's talking about local government. Now, the local government is the crux. That's what we believe, that PTI is going to do something different in this country, because that is where you are going to develop economic on a sustainable basis.
I hope
One
so.
thing they have to do in the bureaucracy, the person who is hired in some ministry, he must be retired from that ministry. It would not be like that.
He should not be rehired.
Commission, other day DC, then other day here.
Well, there has to be a mechanism, sir, and everything
what
should
I'm
be...
saying.
You know, the only thing which, if you do, hire everyone on merit. That's it.
It is on merit.
Have a
but
proper...
don't
No, sir,
make
it's
them-
always on Safari, sir. Come on, you work, I
Sir,
work, we all
in
work, and we
bureaucracy-
all know how it is, sir.
bureaucracy,
You know,
bureaucracy I'm talking
there
about.
should
But
be
they
a
are the
proper...
BA, they are the graduated.
no,
they are
the
word
highly
Safarish.
qualified.
No, no.
You know, the Safarish word should be a word of past, I guess. So anyway, Dr. Saab, thank you very much. Rami Saab, was a pleasure. Bande Saab, thank you so much. And that's all we have for this week. I'll see you on Monday, inshallah, at 8. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.
and Lufthansa and Swissair and even the Arab Ittihad and all that, you have something like 80 to 110 people per aircraft. And I'm talking of the big carriers. In Pakistan, you've got 550 people
That's
per
the
aircraft.
beauty, sir, isn't it? So many jobs for so many people for doing nothing.
And then if you want to correct them, the unions come into play.
All right.
You know.
Anyway, sir, I wish we had more time, but Brigadier Saab, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Dr. Saab, thank you very much. Dr. Saab, it was a pleasure to have you as well, sir. That's all we have for this hour. I'll see you at 8 tomorrow. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.
Sitar is a plucked string instrument used in Pakistani classical music.
Is subsidized as such. So
And the prices
even
are higher as well, yeah?
yeah, even in these things increase, your biggest sufferer is the agriculture sector.
All right.
So in this context,
So, you know,
on which
what you're
area
saying-
you are going to
Yeah,
talk with
so
the
you have to
Modi?
define the common grounds. Basically, you know, since you said that, you know, there's certain, who is going to define what? Now, that is going to be the first step. So your takes in closing remarks.
You see, it has been a very positive development, and because it was debated in the Indian media and in the Pakistani media as well, whether Modi is going to congratulate Imran Khan or not, because their foreign office had just made a statement which just you know, appreciated Pakistani people of, you know, having a trust and faith in the electoral process, and nothing to do with PTI or Imran Khan. But eventually Modi did decide to call Imran Khan and congratulate him on his success, and of course wished him well and talked of relations between the two countries. I think in my view, the basic issue has been that for the last several years there has been no dialogue between the two countries, and now that we have had this beginning where Modi has
Is there any
congratulated-
probability for that, sir?
Yes, I think
coming
now
days, coming months,
can
coming years?
we can be hopeful. However, the one stumbling block is that the Indian elections and the Modi governments or Modi parties, you know, primary election campaign, as Professor Saab just mentioned, based on Hindutva or Indian Hindu nationalism, which is anti-Muslim or anti-Pakistan. Whereas in Pakistan elections 2018, India was not an issue at all. It was not part of anybody's manifesto in order to win votes. Whereas unfortunately in India, Pakistan is always an issue, or it is made an issue, and it gets them votes. So I think there is a possibility that till this election happens in India, Modi government may not be willing to take any chances, or in their, you know, direction towards Pakistan, or making, you know,